And then another example of the strengths is the cost advantages, okay, which we have already covered. Economies of the scale might be one of the examples of the cost advantages we may enjoy. And another strength might be superior advertising campaign. Okay, if we are really good at advertisement or the promotions, and that will give us competitive advantages. So that could be the strengths of our company. Strength number 10, product innovation skills. Okay, if we have very innovative skills in producing the certain product, definitely that's one of our strengths. And that's related to the intangible assets in the core competency analysis. Okay, and if we have the proven management team, that's also related to the human resources in 4 different types of the management resources, right? The third types of the resources the company may have is the human resources. And the proven management team is an example of the human resources. So that could be one of the core competencies of our company. And short learning curve from the accumulated experiences. That's another example of the intangible assets of the company. If we have been in this business for a long time and we have accumulated a lot of the experience, know-hows, and then that's how we can quickly master another way of doing producing the products, and with a short learning curve, and that will be one of our core competencies. Superiority of the manufacturing capacity. Okay, so if we are really big manufacturing capacity compared to our competitors, that can be one of the core competencies. And finally, the final example of the strength is the superiority of the technical capabilities. So in case our company's business is technology-driven manufacturing company, and if all the employees of our company has some technical capabilities better than the competitors, and such a great superiority of the technical capabilities might be one of the core competencies. Now let's have a look at some of the examples of the weaknesses. The first example of the weaknesses is unclear strategic direction. So if the company has an unclear strategic direction, and then that will be a negative sign of doing the businesses. So that could be one of the weaknesses. And then the second example of the weakness is that the aging facilities. So if we are a company producing a certain type of a product, and if the facilities of our company is old enough to make a great, is too old, so it's not a great the facilities to produce the best of the products, and that's not a good news to our company's businesses. So that might be one of the weaknesses. And then the below average profitability structure. So in case we are not in a cost leadership of the businesses, with low profitability, and then that is a negative element in doing the business. And the next one is the lack of the quality management resources. If we are very good at in quality management, that's one of the strengths. But in case that we do not have such quality management resources, and that's one of the weaknesses. And the next example of the weaknesses is the absence of core competencies. Okay, yeah, that's definitely is right. So if we have any of the core competencies, that's the strengths of our company. So by definition, if we have the core competency, that's one of the strengths. So by definition, if we do not have core competencies, and that's the weaknesses. Okay? Especially if we want to run a business, and if we identify the necessary required capabilities running the business in that areas, and we do not have the required capabilities, and then that's the critical weaknesses. And once we decided to launch the businesses in those areas, and we have to have such competencies anyway, whether growing internally or the importing from external entities through the M&As or the strategic alliances. Okay, lack of ability to execute strategies. Okay, that's one of the weaknesses as well. So in weakness number one of the example was that the unclear strategic direction. So that's we are poor at developing the strategies, or our strategy developed is not the best strategy to pursue. So there's something wrong in building the strategies. So that's an example in weakness number one. And in weakness number 6, so we mentioned the lack of ability to execute strategies. Okay, so that's about the implementation of the strategy. Even though the strategy we set was great, and if we do not have the ability to execute the strategies as we planned, that's the problem. So that's something I have emphasized in my previous class of the Professor Cespedes' aligning strategy and sales, right? So alignment of the strategy and sales in the at the site. So at the implementation was made, and that's the critical. That's also important as building the business strategies. Okay, so let's move on to the next example of the weaknesses: problems with the internal operating systems. Okay, so the company is taking a lot of steps to create the values according to the Michael Porter's value chain analysis. They are buying the raw materials, and then they do some of the researches and development processes and manufacture the products and deliver the products with the marketing and sales activities, and they provide the after services. So if there is any thing wrong, if there's problems with the internal operating systems around creating the values, and then that's one of the weaknesses, definitely. And another example of the weaknesses are vulnerable R&D capabilities. Okay, especially when the business of their company requires extensive activities in R&D, such as the semiconductor businesses of the Samsung Life Insurance, Samsung Electronics. So Samsung Electronics semiconductor business requires an extensive R&D activities. So in case they are very vulnerable in terms of the R&D capabilities, that's one of the critical weaknesses of the companies. And another example of the weaknesses is vulnerability in product line. Okay, so once again, if the company is engaging in a business where the production is really critical in doing the business, and in case the company is very vulnerable in product line, that could be one of the weaknesses. And weak marketing images with market images. So it's if the company has a very strong brand recognition, that could be a strength. But in case the company has a weak market images, and that's one of the weaknesses. And another example of the weaknesses is the weak distribution network. In case the company requires extensive distribution network to sell those products and to deliver those products, and if the company's distribution network is very weak, that could be one of the weaknesses. Okay, if the company does not have proper marketing skills, that's also one of the weaknesses. And high production cost per unit. So that's similar to the below average profitability structure, or their cost structure is not competitive. Okay, if the company incurs lots of the production cost compared to their competitors, so that will put the company in a disadvantageous positions. Okay, so a lot of strengths and weaknesses I have illustrated are related to the core competency analysis which I have done. So in the core competency analysis, we divided our resources in 4 different categories, from physical resources, financial resources, and human resources, and finally the intangibles. And also in creating the values according to the value chain analysis of the Michael Porter, there are a lot of different stages in creating the values. So if there is anything strong in any of the steps, or if we are weak in any of those steps, such as good or bad in purchasing the raw materials, or strong or weak in R&Ds, or strong or weak in production lines, or strong or weak in our brand images or the marketing strategies, or strong or weak in our management teams, those things are all related to the internal environmental factors. And as we have discussed in the external factor analysis, if those things are good news to a certain company, that can be categorized as the strengths. And if those are not good news to a certain company, that can be categorized as the weaknesses. And also strengths to our company may not be strengths to our competitors. So whether it can be categorized as the strengths as the weaknesses are based on the perspectives, based on the views from which perspective we are looking at those factors. Okay, so those are the list of, or the examples of the opportunities, threats, strengths, and weaknesses. So once again, the purpose of the SWOT analysis is to assess the objective situation of the company from the external and internal environment perspectives. So in the SWOT analysis, we are looking at a lot of external and internal factors, internal environmental factors, And the purpose of the SWOT is looking those factors from the company's perspectives, very objectively. What's the implication of those factors to the business of our company? So that's the beauty of doing the SWOT analysis.